Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the first half of the warm-up cycle that we're currently on in world cultures for the third quarter. Please go ahead and copy down the questions and the answers in full, and remember to format your answers in a different colored font. And remember, when you're finished with this part of the presentation, do not submit yet because you still need a second half of warm-ups for this particular cycle. Let's go ahead and get started. From Monday and Tuesday, from February 22nd to February 23rd. How did communism come to China in the 1900s, and what specific events occurred within the country that had long-standing impacts? In this lesson, we learned about the essence and tenets of communism and how and why China shifted to a communist fervor under the rulership of Mao Zedong. We also learned about some of the specific policies that were implemented by Mao directly onto China. Let's go and get started. Number 1, a series of failed rebellions proved to be problematic for Chinese stability. Sun Yat-sen plotted to overthrow the Qing dynasty at the time, which was ruling, and army rebels joined them too. Now, of course, this would create the perfect storm for rebellion and dissent amongst and for the Chinese government. A new government was actually designed and implemented with, technically speaking, a new president, a senate, a lower house, and a new constitution. And although these things sound good, this government fell apart with small-scale armies rising up in different pockets of China. So even though this government tried to consolidate power, there would prove to be different types of people who would try to rival it. The years of 1912 to 1949 are known as the Chinese Republic, where Chiang Kai-shek and communist nationalists fought each other, and this type of infighting created a weakened China. Meanwhile, while this was happening, Japanese were invading China and took over many parts of it, and eventually the commies or the communists would win over the country. This would later bring, of course, Mao Zedong, who had found the People's Republic of China. When Mao comes to power and consolidates government and organizes it under his iron thumb, so to speak, we see a new type of strong China coming to fruition. Mao's policies, however, had both mostly negative impacts on China. The Great Leap Forward, for example, although it was designed to move China forward economically speaking, implemented policies of land redistribution and industrial reforms which proved to be problematic. And of course, this whole notion of self-reliance in terms of economic terms was hard to come to fruition. Additionally, the Cultural Revolution was implemented by Mao, which was a socio-political program meant to oust outdated traditional customs and adopt more communist-centered ideals. This would prove to be incredibly problematic as Mao would seek to systematically root out old customs, old ideas, old habits, and more to make China more like a communist mecca than anything. Mao's policies and the communist years on China and Asia in particular, would have huge long-standing ramifications for years to come. Let's move on to the next question of the day. For Thursday and Friday, from 225 to 226, what is modern China like today? Identify some of the biggest challenges and hurdles facing the country now and for a long time to come. In this lesson, we learned about some of the contemporary issues facing China and East Asia. Let's go ahead and dissect some of these issues briefly. The dark legacy of communism in China has long-standing resentment of most people today, who very much so might have disdain against the communist years, but can't publicly speak out against it freely, due to reasons we're going to talk about later in this lesson. China is known for having an economic boom that has sustained a large part of Asia and their legitimacy on world markets. With diversified markets and a lot of factories producing things in China, this has paved the way for economic success in China. Although the problem here is that there's a very glaring economic disparities and environmental problems in China specifically from its focus on economics first, the need of the people, and environment second. Additionally, Hong Kong is problematic for China. Hong Kong is a provincial territory off the coast of China, and there are issues today over autonomy and provincial rights. Essentially, this is the battlefield, if you will, between democracy in Hong Kong versus communist China. The Great Firewall is also problematic for China too. China is actually censoring a lot of media networks and information lately in society, aiming to curtail free speech and problematic rivalship, if you will, of differentiating thought against what President Xi would like. The one-child policy still has huge ramifications in China, even though the policy is no longer in act. In this lesson, you learned about some of the problems that have, of course, systematically came from this policy, with huge population and generational disparities becoming more and more evident and problematic for China as a whole. And last but certainly not least, of course, the pandemic has caused huge problems for not only China, but of course the world. China in particular, though, is struggling still with COVID-19 rates And I would argue that they're mostly struggling with the lack of transparency with the world. There's a reason why a lot of Arab mystery still surrounds China and COVID-19. Only time will tell how China handles these diversified issues. So as you guys can see, those are the answers to the questions for this week's lessons. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the corresponding lessons.